What's up? We're live.
We're live on a lot of platforms too. Like like I see
cool.
like one,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different
Well, you
places we're
added
streaming
3.
to. Yeah,
You
extra reach.
we've gotten quite a bit of bump from Twitter the last couple weeks.
Nice.
So, yeah.
I feel like Twitter streaming is new to me. I don't know. Like Brooks, weren't you streaming there
Oh my
recently
gosh.
doing some
Yeah,
stuff?
I
Like
had such a frustrating experience with
really?
Twitter
Really?
recently. Yeah. Well, I was already like, one, like I was trying to figure out streaming in general because I really haven't done a lot of it. And then two, I was like already kind of curmudgeonly because I was like, I just don't want to pay for Twitter. It's fine if you do. Like we pay for the remix site and everything. I just personally didn't want to pay for it. So I'm like, okay, I'm paying $8 just to stream. I can stream other
Oh.
places for free. That's really annoying. And then two, it just like there were just a lot of things that did not go well. People were like, yeah, it's like cutting out. And it wasn't like on my side. The stream was perfectly fine because I did it in other places. So I think it's like good if you're doing the StreamYard situation where it's like, yeah, blast out to everything. I think that makes sense. But like purely streaming on
Were you
Twitter,
on the desktop?
yes.
Oh, that's probably why. So I was
Probably.
on the open sourced conversation last week. Yes. And they said the desktop was buggy. It's far better from the mobile experience. But then obviously we're just doing it through StreamYard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I don't know. I was frustrated. I quit my subscription to Twitter. Like I'm still obviously
Afterwards.
on the website, but yeah, I was just
Done.
like, this isn't worth $8 for me. I like the constraint of like the word count and everything.
Oh yeah.
Just OG
There
Twitter.
is, I know, right? Don't you feel like such an old person when you start saying stuff like that? I was like, I don't think the compressed stuff we're not paying for.
Yeah, I'm not paying for mine either. And it seems like it's streaming there. So
okay.
Who knows about Twitter Pro or whatever the heck it is.
It is so bizarre.
Now. Like,
and it's so hard to figure out what you actually have to pay for and what you don't. And like all their like websites are in a half broken state. Because like we're changing everything.
Yeah.
So they got that out really fast, but they didn't actually necessarily change everything. So anyway.
I still think it's one of the best places to go to like hang out and talk with people.
It's the best tech. Yeah.
I can't deny that. Like, and it's mostly just because there's a lot of people there. And again, that like it's so ephemeral. And that's why I wanted to stream there. Because I was like, I don't want to stream serious stuff. I'm just streaming like just me randomly hacking on something and like 2 people can show up and tell me what I'm doing wrong. So that was my thought process for why I kind of wanted to use it for streaming. But yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I'll go in with a hot take here. We were talking about ESM earlier, and my take is that we've reached critical mass. We're over the hill, and and people will come kicking and screaming at the end of the day, even if the performance isn't great or such and such or whatnot. I think like between Syndra moving all of his libraries over and some big libraries moving to ESM first or ESM only, like we're over the hill at this point. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I think that's valid. Like, I think you're right in the sense of like, for a long time it was, like I remember first hearing about it with like D3. That's what I used to do a lot of work in visualization, data visualization stuff. And I remember like they kind of switched over to ESM early on and people were like pretty frustrated. And even back then they were just like, this is the future. We got to go this way. So it is kind of one of those things that's frustrating because it's like, this has been the future for a really long time. But I do think you're right that we're kind of in a new phase. But I also am like super aware that Remix recently moved to Vite as our compiler and as our build step. So like I'm kind of more just in that world and Vite is kind of pushing it forward. So I don't know how much like of an echo chamber I'm personally in, but yeah, it does kind of feel like enough big projects are saying like, nah, we got to like ESM is the standard. We got to go that direction, fix all your packages or leave the ones behind that are not being updated, not being maintained.
Has anybody actually published a package with both CJS and ESM?
Yeah, it's like
it's a nightmare. It's a complete and total nightmare. And I see why people are just like, yeah, then I'm only going to do one, and it's ESM. Like it was so difficult.
Well, there's also a big difference between like package management, library development, and actually developing on top of things. And I think the more that I've been at Redwood, the more I see that divide in terms of the problems that the other engineers are solving and then what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're
Yeah.
saying just developing
Very
on
cool.
top of things, writing an app, like you can obviously get around a lot of that stuff, but it's like, yeah, when you're really leaning hard into making a package for it.
Yeah. Like, okay, so prime example is we released our Canary last week that featured React Server components. And if you look at the router, it looks like nothing in our router changed. And so there were people that looked at this and are like, wow, this is awesome. Like nothing changed on my end and I get all the power. Like
Yeah.
that's what we want people to see and to hear. But at the same time, there's this element of, oh, nothing changed. It's like, no, everything changed. You don't
Yeah.
understand how much work went into this. Like
Yep.
reworking our entire router, it's completely different under the hood, but people don't see that. They just see this is how I consume it and this is how I use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
Hey,
relatable.
it's a good major version, or is it a major version bump at that point, or is it just a
Oh yeah.
minor?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. No, no, no,
it's a
no. It's a huge, like it's kind of insane right now, just the differences between which Brooks, I don't know if you have any insight into like release strategy. Do you guys talk about that?
Oh, yes, a lot. Yeah.
Oh.
Like Michael and Ryan are very like they've been burned. Like React Router, I think
Oh,
V3
yeah.
maybe or V4, like a lot of people are still mad at them to this day, which
really?
I think is very funny but for lots of reasons. Anyway, yeah, they had they had a pretty big like breaking change kind of experience, and React Router has always been so big. And honestly, it's like the way they'll talk about it now, at least what I've heard, is they're like, we were kind of learning this at the time. Like we were learning how to
Mhm.
do open source, just like a lot of people
Oh
were.
yeah.
And yeah, our project got like huge, and we were a training company that also like worked on this, this React router like on the side, and like had a really good name and was pretty good actually. And we realized things we should be doing better. And so yeah, they had a really bad experience. It burned a lot of people. So from then on, they've been like incredibly careful about like migration strategies being incredibly like simple and clear, and like so many times where we just want to nick something or just throw away an API, and
Mhm.
we're like, no, we have to keep that, or we
Yeah.
have to like start the deprecation strategy or whatever. So it's like, I feel like every conversation I have with the team is involves something about like, okay, what's the migration story for this? What does
Uh-huh.
this look like in V3? What does this look like in V4? They're very forward thinking, which I
Yeah.
really appreciate.
Yeah. Do you have to write a code bond for this or
Yes,
is
yeah,
that too?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nuts though, because like I used the future flags, and like that made it so easy. You adopt
Yeah.
one when you're ready to adopt it, and as soon as the release comes out, you just drop the future flag. Like that made updating to a major version incredibly easy. But I feel like it might make like branching in the code a little bit complex. It's like feature flagging basically a bunch of your um, features for the upcoming release.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Amy, are you familiar with these? I don't want to.
Yeah, I am. So
Okay, cool.
I
Yeah.
I dabble in like all the things,
Cool.
all
Good.
like all the frameworks and just trying to get a handle on what
Yeah.
everybody does well because everybody does something really well and there's
Yes.
something to be learned everywhere. So there's stuff that Remix does that I really like that I'm excited to talk about.
Cool.
And then other things that I'm like, huh, what do you think about this?
This was a choice. Yeah.
But I did, yeah, this was a choice. But one thing, because Brad kind of alluded to it, do you have insight into like how stuff gets pulled for release? Like, your branching strategy that you guys use and like
Mhm.
the tooling that you guys use around release? Do you do that stuff at all?
Yeah, I don't do it. I am pretty familiar with it though. I'm pulling up a doc just to make sure I don't totally speak out of turn, because we have a pretty good doc that like literally, like we have one person on our team who primarily does like our releases. However, the doc is set up to where like anyone can do it. So
Nice.
because we have had other people who need to run it, just if that person's out or whatever it may
Mm-hmm.
be, trying to find, yeah, contributing. So basically, the main thing is like we have dev and main branch. Those are like the main two. So doc changes can go into main, because we actually use like our GitHub docs to drive our actual doc site. Like it's all server side rendered and heavily cached and everything. So yeah, that kind of stuff. And like template updates that can just go directly to main.
Mm-hmm.
But new features, of course, need to go into dev. And so that's kind of how it's always working. And we use like, I can't remember what the exact tool we use is, but we do have like automatic change logs like set up and everything. So whenever you are adding a new feature, whatever, it kind of detects what that change log is. Is it going to be a major or minor, etc. So those always get compiled. And then like when we're ready to cut a release, we try to stay pretty on top of releases, do them about every 2 weeks. It's not like a hard and fast. It's just kind of something we aim for. And so when we get to that point, basically you just kind of compile it together, make your actual change log, like write it up, and then it's ready to go. And that's like released. And again, like you were alluding to, Brad, with our future flags and like our unstable flags and everything, that's like our biggest thing to make it really easy to continually contribute stuff that's like not 100% there. But we still wanted to make it in. And then for like the crazy experimental like stuff that we're like, we don't know if this is even going to see the light of day. We really try to keep that stuff in separate packages for the most part. But we also have this like weird interplay with React Router, because React Router is like honestly like 80% of what Remix really is. And so we're constantly like, whenever we do a release, we are also releasing React Router at the exact same time, because typically we'll need to make changes to it to update Remix. A good example of that is like single fetch. That's a new feature we've got coming out imminently, very soon. And so it required us to like make a change to React Router underneath the hood. So I'm very impressed they keep all this stuff straight and it doesn't feel like a mess, because when I like sit back and think about it, it does like, I'm like, I would have totally screwed all this up and made like a huge mess and had like a million branches and everything.
Yes.
So I'm impressed they maintain about 2.5 branches to get all this stuff out there.
Yeah.
You just single fetch. Like I've heard about it, but I feel like it's not in the docs yet. So I want to learn more. So
yeah.
We got to add that to the notes for today.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah.
So sorry, this is gonna be a little behind the scenes. I'll explain what we do, because I just learned our process, and then since we're kind of like already talking and in a decent flow, I'm just gonna save the intro for the very end. So people that are listening, and we are recording a podcast live, we're gonna do this really weird like hello at the end. It's gonna be opposite day, so we'll just keep going so we don't break that flow. But actually, but I will say, so you'll hear the sponsor spot twice. I do want to highlight our sponsor, because I really am like proud of them and very grateful that they are sponsoring the podcast. So we are sponsored by Postman. They're having a conference at the end of this month. So it's like April 29th through May 1st. James and I will be there live. We're very excited about it. And Postman is a great tool, especially when you're working with APIs and things like that. They have fantastic tools to be able to interact with those and be able to get the data. So be sure to check Postman out. Special thanks to them for sponsoring. So kind of coming back around, release has been really interesting. And the reason I was asking questions is because I was just trained on our release process. And a lot of it involves context that I don't necessarily have for the project. So as we're trying to do all this stuff with SSR and RSC and trying to keep all of that stuff straight on top of continuing to move forward with like all of our stable code that people are using every day. What is interesting is there's a guy on our team that's written specific tooling for our release process. And I can include a link to that on GitHub. Everything's open source. You can check it out. But basically you go to this code base and it will pull down everything from GitHub, and it'll check to see what the differences are between our next and our main branch. So everything's getting put into main. So all of the RSC stuff, all of the SSR stuff, and all of that is under feature flags. So if you want to use it, you can. You just have to say, I'm going to use this canary when you're working with Redwood. But everything else, like when we're doing we call it triage, where you're cherry picking things off of main into that next branch that then gets cut into the release process. So to me, that's just super interesting, because I've worked on like product stuff where you're kind of doing like a dev main branch, like prod setup. But when you're talking about trying to make it easy, like we were talking about migrations with upgrade guides and code mods, it's a little bit different when you're working on a product that people are using versus like trying to build on top of what you're creating.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I resonate with that a lot. And yeah, I know there's like it's a very similar thing of main and dev, and then there's this release next branch that like lives ephemerally and that's like getting cherry picked into. So yeah, very, very similar, and just requires a lot of like, you got to be careful, but also there is a lot of stuff that's automated, which is good, but there's also still like always a human in the loop kind of system. And there's a lot of just like being aware of what everyone else is doing. And then also like Remix has a very bad package problem right now. We have like way too many
Same.
packages, which is something we're yeah. We have plans to resolve that. But right now, it just exists. It's like it's interesting to always bump all these packages that you're like, nothing really changed in that package, but we just got to keep them all the same version.
Well,
So
some of it's like NPM. I didn't realize it was that difficult, but when you have like so many bundles on so many packages that you're pushing to NPM, they rate limit how much you can push. And so it's not,
Oh.
from what I understand, it's not uncommon for NPM to be like, nah, that's enough for now.
Wow.
So, having to kind of
Awesome.
rerun it again just to, just for funsies. But
Yep.
the other thing that, because you mentioned chain sets, that's something else that we've recently
Mhm.
implemented. The guy that was doing releases was going back through everybody's PR when we got ready to do a release and aggregating all of that for the upgrade guide and the release notes.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I was like, no more. We're not doing that. Everybody, if you
That's
write
insane.
it,
Yeah.
you are the best person to talk about it. And
Yes.
so we tried a changelog approach where we just had like a markdown file where you have to have a sentence saying what this
Mhm.
is. But then anytime we were running the release process, there would be a merge conflict. And so we've moved recently to this change set
That's
thing
great.
where you
Yeah.
have to, it's like a separate file. Yep, it makes that process so much easier with the upgrade guys. Just, you can write scripts at that point. Grab all these
Yeah.
files that you see and stick them in a section for me. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a huge difference.
yeah.
I was curious actually with Redwood, who ends up writing the docs? Like, is that one person's job? Is everyone supposed to contribute to the docs? Is that write docs as you go? Because that's another thing
Yeah.
you can see like kind of get out of sync.
Yeah. So ideally, if you write the feature, you also write the test and the docs for it.
Cool. Yeah.
Notice I said ideally, that
Yeah.
does always happen, as part of it. And we also have stuff which, I'm not sure how you guys handle this, but with like experimental code, for example, we have
Mhm.
a discourse, not to be confused with Discord. But we have a discourse forum where we'll talk about, hey, this is an experimental feature that we're thinking about implementing. Here's a canary
Mhm.
that shows how it works. And so sometimes a lot of that documentation ends up living in that forum post. And even as it evolves, gets stuck into comments and things like that. So then if it does get implemented into the stable part of the code, then we've got to go through the forum post and copy all the relevant sections out of the forum post into the doc,
Mhm.
which can sometimes be like, just tedious stuff that's
Yeah.
just part of the job.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just part of the job. Yeah, we do a similar thing, but just GitHub discussions. We have like official RFCs and we have like community RFCs. And so a
Mhm.
lot of times, like I'll put together our newsletter and that's like a really big aggregation of lots of aggregations. And so it's really interesting to go through it and be like, okay, here's like our docs on this thing. And then take it a step back. Okay, here's the initial PR and how we wrote about it then. And then taking a step back and it's like, oh, here's the RFC and like, here's what we thought this was going to look like at the time. So it's always a really interesting like history just to
Mm.
see like what actually made it all the way through all those steps and
Yeah.
what changed and why did it change. So it's really nice having that breadcrumb trail,
Yeah.
but it can be a lot. Like it's crazy how much metadata is created for like a single, what ends up being a single Boolean in a config. And you're like thousands and thousands and thousands of words, written
Yeah.
in discussions and changes of ideas and everything.
I need to go subscribe to your newsletter. That sounds really interesting. Right now, our stuff is spread across I just feel like so many services that there's been a little bit of a push to try and consolidate. Because as I mentioned, they're talking about Discord and Discourse and GitHub and
Yep.
our own personal Slack and
Yeah.
meetings that we have, all the things.
Yeah.
Notion.
Yeah.
There's so much. So much. Okay. Sorry, Brad.
All good. This is good stuff.
Geeking out about framework stuff.
Yeah.
This is the stuff though that I want to talk with more framework developers because
Oh, yeah.
a lot of the times you talk about like the framework and the actual implementation, a lot of
Mhm.
that's more front facing, but the I say the bylaws, it's not like we have, things written out, but like how do you make decisions about what goes into Remix? How do you decide I'm going to be a spa now?
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Yeah, it is a really good question. And oh man, it's so hard because like not that I'm gonna try and answer that, but just to yeah, reflecting on that, like it's been cool to learn a lot more about the framework, but in some ways it's like there are times when I'm like, I feel like I'm so in the weeds and caught up in like the conversations that are having that it's like I have to just like back out and try to rethink as just a user, just like interacting with Remix for the first time or interacting with it, but it's been a second. Like I played with it in V1, but I haven't looked at V2, and like taking a step back, they don't have all the context of the minutia of all those little details and whatnot. So you have to have it in both. Like it is, yeah, it's fascinating, endlessly fascinating to think about like how to build libraries and frameworks and all the decisions that go into that. But then like we were saying earlier, it's just like at the end of the day, the end user, they just kind of want their thing to work, and they want the migrations to be easy, and they don't want to have to think about ESM versus, CJS and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. Do you, how do you guys make the decisions? Is it just like, obviously there's some pull from the community. We felt that like, React decided we're going to do React server components. So we're doing React server components.
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is where like I think I'm really happy that Remix is like part of a team, and like I'm sure you feel the same for Redwood, even like just all these frameworks that like that have a team. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. It's a push and pull, but like the solo developer thing can be really great and it can work really well. But when that gets to a level where it's like you kind of need people to give pushback. So we were constantly like telling each other no, which I think is really healthy and really cool to see about the team. There's a lot of ideas we have. And we just have to like be honest with each other, like internally, just first of like, hey, that's gonna like kind of hurt this piece of like our core tenets, or this gonna hurt this piece. Or like RSC is such a good example where we have pretty one of our bigger blog posts which talks about Next versus Remix. No, it's not that one. Sorry, it's just like RSC, like why we didn't at the time when React Server Components were announced. Ryan wrote a blog that basically said like, we don't think this is giving us any advantage over what we already have, and we kind of think it's worse personally. That is, our opinion has changed on that though, because we like continue to talk about it, continue to think about it, and the API itself like changed a lot over that period of time. So to answer your actual question though, we have a couple things. So they opened up, there's this blog post we had called, I think it's Open Development and Remix or something like that. And the idea was what we're going to start doing is we want the community to be able to give us feedback. We don't just want it to be like we come out of the cave and you're from on high and we have these new tablets or whatever, and we're going to tell you all about the new stuff we have. Like we want the community to be engaged and tell us what they think about new API designs, what the problems they're having are, how we can fix it, etc. So we have RFCs, and we have like our official RFCs that we put out and get community feedback, but also the community can come up with an RFC as well. And a lot of times what will happen is people will create an RFC, and along with that, they'll a lot of times create an actual implementation or a library. For example, like our flat route convention, just how you do files in V2 was originally just a library that someone wrote. It actually still exists, and it has some extra features, so it still exists and works and everything. But that initially was just someone, proposing their idea with an actual plugin kind of system that worked before. So we get a lot of kind of those ways to build things. And then with our future flags and our unstable flags, actually, let me kind of flip those. So the unstable flag is supposed to be like, hey, here we have this idea. This is experimental. Here's a new feature. And you can try it out by doing the unstable. And the idea of that is meant to be like, not necessarily that the feature is unstable, but that the API around it is unstable. We might make changes. We might, come up with new ideas, etc. We originally thought like, oh, this allows us just to like be able to delete this if we don't like it at all, or get rid of this feature. But we've realized even that like does create expectations. People start using the unstable and they're like, yeah, this will get stable one day. And we're like, oh wait, like we weren't trying to promise you that necessarily, but it's okay, because so far we have released everything that we put as unstable. I'm pretty positive about that. Then once we feel good about the API, if it is a breaking change, we'll make it a future flag. And so that allows us to let people have a smoother migration path. So it's, I don't know if I actually answered your question, but it's community, it's internally, it's saying no to each other a lot. I think that's kind of how we get to decisions.
Yeah. I think this is true. I don't think this is a joke. So just take it with a grain of salt. Okay. But I think somebody said they saw a variable name within the React code base that was like, don't use this, otherwise you'll lose your job.
Okay. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you not use it, you'll be fired.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So when you said like there's expectations around stable flags, that's what I thought of, is just name your stuff that.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that one's pretty funny. And I still really love the like dangerously set inner HTML.
Oh
That is
Yeah.
like one of the
that
best
one.
API names ever. It's
So
very,
I hate that
it's
one.
good. Yeah, it's pretty frustrating because it is like it's such a hard thing because it's like this isn't like bad, but it can be kind of like, is it too scary? But
Yeah.
it's also like it probably should. Like I've seen people, skirt around like React and then have cross-site scripting problems like in production
Mm.
apps that are used by millions of people because they, this sign doesn't bother me. I can't read or whatever. It's like it's very much that meme. So
Really good times.
Going back to like how decisions are made at Remix, Remix was recently acquired by Shopify. How much of Shopify's influence drives the decisions that are made at Remix, or do you guys operate as like a very independent entity within the company?
yes, that's a really good question. So yeah, Remix has been part of Shopify a little over a year now, which is kind of hard to believe. Like it doesn't seem like it's been that long. I've only been on the team 6 months, so I've only ever seen like this version of Remix within Shopify, from the inside at least. Of course, I was pretty big in the community outside or before that. So it's a little bit of both. We definitely are like our own team. We operate very much like in our own system. We're primarily on Discord, not even like we have an internal Slack. We do check it.
Yep.
We want to be good coworkers, but we're definitely like way more on Discord and like engaged with that community. So yeah, we really have the freedom to run, to set our own roadmap. I don't think we've ever had anyone like come down from Shopify and be like, you have to build this thing. However, we're just like, we're super cognizant of Shopify's needs, and as well as like the asset that having Shopify at our hands is. One reason like yeah, Michael and Ryan kind of always talk about the idea of like one big reason React did gain popularity despite like a lot of a weird kind of bumpy road was the fact that they could say, hey, we have genuinely tested this with thousands of developers and millions of users. And that's a really big deal. I maybe as like a solo dev or as an indie dev, that doesn't maybe matter as much. You can kind of switch things pretty quickly and try out all the new stuff. But like if you're betting your company on some tech, it's really nice to know that it's kind of been vetted before. So we feel very much the same way at Shopify. Has some of our largest like code bases and users for Remix, and so we really value their information, not just because they are essentially the patron, but because they actually are the highest users. They actually get to see when Remix butts up against really large users and all those kind of things. So we super value their feedback. We do like take into consideration things that they're building, and do try to build features for them. But because we always know those features are going to help other people. A really good example is we have like embedded apps in Shopify, and you can build those with Remix. So basically, yeah, if you're in like your Shopify admin or whatever, you can create an embedded app, and it's like a widget and does all sorts of stuff. I haven't actually used that much. I think the best analogy I can understand is it's kind of like WordPress with like the admin that you have there, and you have all these widgets. All that to say, those are iframes. They're rendered in iframes. So server rendered kind of like iframe is kind of weird and doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like why you even need to server render that. So they kind of gave us the feedback of like, this would be so much easier if Remix were just like a pure spa, or if I just had that option to do a pure spa. So that gave us enough impetus. We'd already thought about doing kind of a spa mode or whatever, but it really drove us to be like, okay, here's a very legitimate need from Shopify. And we know there are other people who have this need too. So why don't we just build this thing that's going to help everybody and create spa mode?
Yeah, that's that's a perfect segue talking about the really recently released spa mode. It's funny because, as an industry, a lot of folks were saying, oh, Create React app is dead and spas are sometimes not the best architecture to choose. And then, here comes Remix saying, look, we did spa mode. And, I know there's upsides to it. So can you talk to like some of the reasoning behind and benefits behind spa mode outside of this Shopify context as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It is pretty funny because it kind of like, I'm sure it kind of gives people whiplash.
Yeah.
We're always trying to be really cognizant of that as well. Because yeah, for a long time, like, there was this whole Jamstack era. That's actually when I started getting into web dev. So I learned web dev thinking that servers are scary. I don't think anyone was trying to give me that impression, but I do think that just the reality of where the ecosystem was at the time, it was really excited about spas. And so that was just true. And even like React Router, the core dependency of Remix was very, very focused on spas. You could always do server-side rendering because you could do server-side rendering in React, but React and React Router and all these, that ecosystem was just really, really hyper-focused on spas at the time, because there were some really cool performance benefits you could get. And it was also just unexplored space. But when Remix came around in 2020, Brian and Michael very much had the idea when they were building it like privately and like closed source and everything. They were like, no, this needs to be fully like server side rendered, because who we're building this for, we are building for large, complicated applications with lots of data. That's kind of our core idea. And they really felt very strongly that you're going to want a server when you're doing that. So they were initially really trying to push for a more kind of server-centric approach to kind of the React ecosystem. RSCs, the RFC for RSC, which is very difficult to say, React Server Components, that actually came out in December of that year of 2020 as well, which was super fascinating. So even React was kind of like, we also think that we should be pushing a little bit more on the server. Like, we have explored the ends of spas, and like that, not that like, oh, and there's nothing there. No, they're great. We feel like we've kind of completed that story in a lot of ways. So now we're kind of going backwards to the server. Next, at the same time in Vercel, we're moving very much to the server. So not that like, it's not, I would never want to pretend that like the React ecosystem invented servers. I think that's what some people can kind of get the impression when we talk about this. It's more just like, there's a lot of developers like me who in 2017, 2018 started learning how to code. And we just kind of missed a lot of like the PHP days and a lot of the, even like Ruby on Rails, and all these, just these things that the industry knew, but it wasn't really passed on to us. So there's a lot of relearning. So now it's kind of funny that in 2024, like 4 years later, we have to say like, hey, also like spas are okay. Like spas are also a very legitimate way to build an application. And in fact, like it's really a misnomer calling it spa mode. Remix is already a spa. Like you can have it as an MPA, but it is a single page app. It's just server rendered and then turns into a spa. All your navigations are client side, etc. So to answer your actual question, why spa mode? Why now? So yeah, it handles like very specific use cases, like if you're using an iframe or whatever, and you want to use Remix. It's also, we realize like just React Router and Remix, as we continue building them, just the difference between them is very small. And so we realize like, honestly, this makes it so much easier for people to either migrate or just use Remix who are already using React Router and like it. And basically, we're just giving them a file convention. If they want it, you can even opt out of that. We're giving them a new file convention and basically module like prefetching, more or less, on links. That's like mostly what we're giving you with Remix spa mode at that point over just traditional like React Router plus Vite. And so we like that migration story. We like it for really simple things, like if you just want to deploy to GitHub pages and you don't really want to think about a server, or you're making something internal and it'd probably be better served by a server, but it's not that just cost analysis of spending all that time spinning up a server just for like 4 users who are okay to wait, an extra 200 milliseconds or whatever for it to load. That's okay. We want to give you like all those options. But we're still very, very big on servers. We're definitely not saying like, oh, that was a mistake. Like now it's all spas. It's just trying to open up the levers a little bit more.
Yeah. And if I understand correctly, some of the APIs that enabled spa mode were the client loader, and isn't there a client action API? So those were the things that says, okay, from the client, perform a fetch to do things that would have traditionally been done on the server.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even remember. I don't remember if like we released them like the client loader and client action first and then did spa mode, or if it was all together. This is what happens a lot, is we have close. Like an end idea. Yeah, single fetch, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is kind of like this as well. It's like we have an end idea and then we go backwards and we're like, oh wait, hold on, let's do this part first because this actually gives you something else cool. So so client loader and client action, you can, they're just like loader and action. They just only run on the client, like you were saying. So it's if you load a page, or even if you do like a client side navigation, or you do like a form submission, it goes back to the server. Like it's still calling from the client, but it goes back to the server. These let you avoid that. So you can set up like an in-memory cache, which might be nice, or use something like TanStack Query or React Query or whatever. I can't remember the name of it now. But if you want to use something like that, this gives you that option. And then you're right, it makes a nice migration, because if you're using spa mode, you're not going to actually use the loader and action that run on the server. You're just going to be using the client loader and the client action at that point. So you can, it's nice that you can use those like either way, whether you have SSR set to true or false, you can still use those client loader and client actions.
Yeah.
But they are necessary if you're in spawn mode.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like, okay, now you've unlocked full flexibility. You've got your loader, you've got your action, you've got your client loader, your client action. Totally up to you when and where things happen. And you can use the client side things for client side caching, or server side things for server side caching, or data fetching or whatnot. So there, now it's been unlocked and you can do whatever you want, wherever you want.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're selling it better than I am.
Well, I come from userland, so yeah, that's the impact.
Very reasonable.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what is single fetch?
Please explain single fetch.
Yeah, so single fetch. Yeah, I'm trying to think how many details to give on how this works. So single fetch, basically, it's an alternative. It's an alternative fetch method. There's two reasons we're doing this. The first one is just goes to a core idea of what Remix is all about. Remix tries to use the platform as much as possible, and when it can't, emulate the platform, or rather when we're like enhancing it, emulate it. A good example of that is scroll restoration. When you go to a new page and then you go back, the browser by default will keep your scroll position where it is. A lot of spas, if you don't implement something to handle this, might jack that scroll and like throw you all the way to the top, or everything re-rendered, and that kind of sucks. That's like not the experience you expect as a user, whether you even think cognitively about whether or not you know your scroll position. Just as a user, you intuit these things of like, this is how the browser works, and now this website doesn't work the way the browser works. So Remix is always trying to do what the browser does, to use the platform and to emulate the platform when we can. We kind of goofed up with fetches a little bit. So when you load a Remix page, like the first load, you just get a document request. It's all server side rendered. But then if you do a client side navigation, you're going to be loading a bunch of stuff. Yeah, you're going to be loading a bunch of stuff. You're going to be loading all this data. And what's weird is you're going to like, let's say you're going from like a route that is like products/ID. So that might have two loaders, one for the products, one for the ID of that specific one. Now you've got two JSON payloads. That's actually different than how just like the browser works by default. If you just go to that page, you get one document, whereas now we're giving you two, which is kind of weird. So we already had this thing that we're like, we kind of did our own version of it. We wanted to load those in parallel, but there's no reason that the return payload has to be these two separate things. So single fetch smooshes them together and gives you just one payload instead. It's a lot more similar to how the actual document request model works. Theoretically, this is going to be helpful for like CDN caching, because you're just caching the data for that specific page. So there's lots of nice upsides to that. However, that's not even why single fetch is cool. That was just like one motivation. Is this other piece that we were really excited about, and this is where it gets into RSCs. I don't even know if we necessarily want to go there, but
yes, we do.
Okay. There's this one of our developers, Jacob Eby, had created this library called TurboStream, and I think he actually forked it from something that I think Rich Harris of Svelte had created. And essentially, it's like this alternative format, essentially, that you can send down now like any objects you want, or naked objects as you may call them. So you can send down like a date, like in JavaScript, or a map, or a set. You can send a promise down, which is also incredibly interesting. So now from a loader and an action, you can just send whatever data you want down, and it's automatically like deserialized or destructured, whatever. I actually don't totally understand.
I was going to say how
this all works.
That I do not understand.
Magic, just good old fashioned magic. No, the library's out there. Again, it's like TurboStream has all the implementation of how this works. That's essentially what we're using. My understanding is this will be replaced with how RSC works. We're going to be replacing it with like the RSC kind of system for this exact same thing. So this is another bridge to getting there. But yeah, it's super cool that in single fetch you can just be like, yeah, I just want to actually just send down like my data as is. I don't want to serialize it or anything. And then you get that data exactly how it is, which is super cool and really helpful for, again, like promises over the wire. You can just send down like, oh, this data is loading, but it's not done. Once it's resolved though on the client, you'll undo it all and you'll show whatever I want once it's done. And eventually you can just send down a component. You can just send down a React component from your loader, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I can summarize this, what I took away. So like single fetch essentially for nested routes, or, routes with multiple segments, performs all the data fetching in one fetch rather than one for each. But then it also unlocks sending down not just deserialized stuff. You could
Yep.
send out real JavaScript stuff to the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
With magic.
Pretty
Yeah.
much whatever you want. Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
but if you're going from like you use the product example where you have like a
Mhm.
products page with the template and it's like product 1, so that's nested inside. With single fetch, so you go to product number 2, it doesn't necessarily need to reload all the other stuff. It just needs to reload that section for product 2. With single fetch, you don't have to like still get that whole payload, right? You could still just send the segment that you need.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and this is where it does get it does get philosophically a little bit interesting because initially
Okay.
exactly what you just described is
Mhm.
part of the reason why we wanted to just send down the data for the segment that changed because we're
Right.
thinking, oh, this is an optimization, right? You're only
Mhm.
changed. So you're absolutely right that this actually does change it, and you do refetch basically everything and resend everything down.
Okay,
At first
interesting.
glance, that seems like it sucks, right? Like, oh, now I'm like overfetching again, and I'm sending all this data down. What we found in practice, my understanding, and we're still going to keep working this out because it is
Yeah.
unstable. We are going to want feedback from the community. What we found is the reality is it's actually again like if you're using a CDN, which like you probably should be for data that you really do need to cache and that isn't changing that often or whatever, that's actually better just to cache the data for every individual route versus you've
Mhm.
now created like an like an n times n problem or whatever to where like your products now have to be cached like in this weird way of like products is cached, but then every individual one is cached versus just saying like products 1, products 2, products 3, just caching those as full URLs is a little bit easier in how CDNs kind of already think, more or less. So that's one thing that we found. And then secondarily, our our thought process is my best understanding of this. Hopefully, I don't mess this up too much, but the optimizations you should be doing really are probably going to be on your database anyway and on caching at like the server level
Mm.
and how those run. So if you're really trying to rely on just like the URL changing slightly and that speeding up like your loading, you're probably missing out on a big advantage of just optimizing your database to begin with to where just requesting that data shouldn't be a big deal because it's already cached. You already know it is. It's in an LRU, maybe on your
Yep.
server, or your database is really close because you're using like SQLite or something. So there's a lot of strategies that you maybe should already be looking at anyway, regardless of how like Remix run like works. So I think that's the other process, but it's a valid question. It's one I actually have too. So
Yeah.
I'm eager to see, yeah, if people find that that single fetch is making their applications worse or producing performance problems. But from the testing we've done so far, what we've seen, we really don't think it actually is a big deal. But we want people to use it, which is why it's unstable and it won't be a complete feature until the next version.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see the benefit with that because I've done something before where the thing in the nested file should change something in the parent. And it's like,
Mhm.
I've got to figure out how to force a refresh
Oh, that's
on the entire
interesting. Yeah.
page. And so it seems like that single fetch would resolve that issue because it would send down the updated data based on whatever I did in the child.
Yeah, it's one of these examples where I think Remix like maybe was trying to be too clever. We kind of always have this challenge, I feel at least, because we do things that I really like and like feel super nice and feel
Mhm.
really, really cool. But then you kind of run them in like real world applications, and we realize, oh, you know what? Like that thing that was cute is actually a pain in the ass now that we're
Mhm.
now that we're
Mhm.
like
Sure.
making money on this app. So yeah, I'm totally with you that it's like more often than not, it's like if you're that worried about refetching all your data, you probably should be using something like GraphQL or something, like a
Right.
cacher. There's all sorts of other strategies that do that better than like Remix trying to be really, really clever. Um, yeah.
I
You
think
you
that's what I've learned is like Remix doesn't do a whole lot for you, like at the end of the day, but it also does, it gives you
Yeah,
all the
it's weird.
power without getting in your way too much. Very
Yep.
interesting
It
concept.
is it is. That's, I wrote a case study on I don't know if y'all have ever used, like, the Shop app, if you know what I'm talking about. Um, it's
I think so,
like
yeah.
okay, cool. It basically, like, the main thing it does is it tracks, like, all of your,
Yeah.
anything you've ever bought, essentially, or that's
mm,
shipping
mhm.
to you. But it also you can, like, purchase through it. It's got all sorts of Shopify vendors on it, and you can buy or stores, and you can buy from them. So we did a case study on them and how they built shop.app, the website, on Remix. And one thing that I found super interesting is it's like they honestly didn't even use probably like 80% of what Remix has. And even some of the features that I think are super cool, they have like interest in them and are exploring them. But they said over and over again, they said, we love Remix because it got out of our way when we needed it to. Like, it was not forcing us into a paradigm we didn't want. And that meant that we developed this way faster than we ever would have with just like the Shopify stuff that we already had and other things that we'd used before. Like, it allowed us to go super fast, even though we didn't even use a lot of it, which is, I still don't, that doesn't make any sense to me, because that blows my mind of like what a library is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to make you go fast because of all the things it offers you. But yeah, it is this weird like negative space thing.
There, trying to think. I have like so many things. I'm like, oh, let's talk about this. But one thing that I did want to highlight, I was talking to Tanner, this was probably 3 or 4 months ago. And one of the things that he said in the conversation was, it's kind of going to sound philosophical, but what is a framework really? And he was like, really, it's mostly a router, which is true. So like, I'm working on a project right now that's going to build the same application 6 different ways. So I'm building it on Redwood, Remix, Next App API, Next Pages API, Svelte, and Astro. And what's interesting is that Astro, depending on what front end I lean into, whether that's React or Svelte, it'll be different. But all the other things, the components and the migrations for being able to build it is super easy, because you can use a lot of the same React components, because we're all using React at the end of the day. One of the biggest differences is the router, which I'm working on. Like, I have a blog post I can share where I compared Next stuff. I'm going to say stuffs because it's 2, and then Remix and Redwood. But like, that's where like a lot of the core differences are the router, and then how you're fetching data, because you guys have the data loaded pattern right now, and then rendering. So like the rendering piece in my mind is where you're going to make a lot of your decisions, because right now with Redwood Stable, it's all SPA stuff, but moving forward, it's going to be more server side stuff. Remix is server side, and then Next is like decision fatigue. You pick your poison, So, but I think that goes to kind of what you're talking about is, are they really using Remix stuff? Well, what do you consider Remix versus what do you consider React?
Yes, exactly.
That blog post is going to be so good. I can't wait to
read it. I'm excited.
I'll send you the first part of it that's just comparing the 3. So I stuck it on the Redwood blog post, or Redwood, and we don't have to talk about this stuff now. Yeah, we're getting close on time. It'd be like a whole rabbit hole. But talking about the Remix router and how you got, one of the things that's interesting compared to all the other implementations is you guys have layout stuff within the names of your folders. It's a choice.
Wait, we have layouts in the name of our, like the what specifically are you talking about actually?
Yeah, so like if I'm gonna have say I'm going to have an app section of my site and a marketing section of my site, then the folder that contains that, if I wanted it to be as part of the route, I can say app, and then the next folder might be app.login, app.dashboard, whatever. And then if you're using, I think my computer's getting slow, but you would have all the layout stuff for the app within that app directory. So you have like stuff kind of embedded, whereas like Next, they have a layout file that's in that folder that's pulling stuff in. And then with Redwood, we're using a completely different system where it's more of like a components, where you're going to set up a layout component that you then wrap stuff with. And technically, like even though it's really just like a React component, you can reference it within our router file. But I would say that's one of the things that differentiates Redwood is there's a single file that lists out every single route that you're using. Based on the folder structure. And you could have a file called cats, but the route is called dogs. Like you can make it confusing if you want. You shouldn't, but anyways, it's just interesting these decisions that people have made. And I think a lot of it, what I was saying before, every framework is good in its own right. And a lot of it comes down to you as the developer and the opinions that you have and the developer experience that you want to work within.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even file-based routing is like a big reason we even went with it wasn't necessarily because we thought it was better DX, but because it just allowed us to do like geez, what's it called? Like lazy loading and bundle splitting and all sorts of stuff
Mm,
like that. So it actually it at the end of the day was more of a technical reason, but it is frustrating because I agree. Like I'm actually not a huge fan of file-based routing all the time, and I think that no matter what, like no matter how good you make it, you're going to have to put like magic in there. So like yeah, Next went with like a layout file. I dislike that a lot personally because I don't like having a million files called layout, and I got to
Yeah.
figure out which one is which. So I like remixes more, but even it is kind of frustrating because it's like, okay, well, I want this to be like a layout file, but I don't want it to actually show up in the URL. So now I have to use an underscore. And so you have to
right.
like learn all these conventions and you're basically just learning a new language, which I really don't like when I'm just trying to think about, yeah, my routes. So I've always like, yeah, I honestly lean a little bit more this way. And I think a lot of the team is just going with our config because we actually have config based routing. I feel like I find it much, much easier.
Brad, tell me
Personally,
about it. I haven't looked at
yeah,
it.
we probably should be louder about it, honestly. But it's also like we're constantly refiguring out how
Yeah.
our routing like configuration piece works. The routing we
Okay.
feel really solid on how it works, but just like the actual like yeah, the language, the communication to the actual
Mhm.
developer is always it's always a big question.
We feel that.
So yeah, yeah, exactly. So you definitely understand. Yeah, it definitely could be better. I personally I really love like component based routing. Like I think it's such a cool way
Mhm.
to like talk about your routes, but then that one becomes a
Mhm.
huge problem because then people can conditionally render a route, and that
Yes.
actually
Yeah.
really really breaks your loading patterns and
Yeah.
breaks all sorts of like lazy loading of files and of JS. So like yeah, it's just all these constraints make it really hard. So I'm with you that yeah, I don't love I don't love it either, but there are reasons. I do promise that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and you kind of touched on this or alluded to it earlier when you were talking about the shop app and just as things get bigger. And this is also kind of an ongoing conversation that Brad and I've had because he's working for a larger organization where these things come up is that the problems that you encounter when you're trying to build at scale are very different than I'm just going to hack on the weekend.
Mhm.
So there's patterns that Remix has that I really, really like when my app is small. But then as soon as it starts to scale, I feel the growing pains of that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so it's also, considering those 2 use cases, and it's also, honestly, one of the reasons why we're starting to lean more into the RSC stuff and different data fetching patterns is
Mhm.
because people will start Redwood and they're like, "Oh goodness, I've got to do GraphQL and create this whole
Mhm.
backend, and oh, this is so heavy. I just want to hack at something." And so
Mhm.
trying to provide those people with more options so that they're not tied to GraphQL unless they
Yeah.
want to be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think we're getting late in the show, and there's a topic we haven't touched on. I think we really should. Um, we should talk about the future of React and how Remix plays into that. So, bringing in the RSC conversation, streaming, suspense, all those new React features. What's Remix want to do with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, React has been kind of in a weird like identity crisis for the past 4 years, in my opinion. That's kind of the way I describe it, at least. And yeah, RSC React Server Components has been this really interesting idea. It's fascinating to hear people talk about it because it feels very divisive. Actually, it feels like you have three responses. One, you love it and think it's the future and it's going to change everything, which is kind of I think actually where like Ryan is at. Two, you do not like it and you think that it is going to be a big problem and it's going to yeah just cause all sorts of anti patterns and it's just going to be a headache and all these things, which is I think where Ryan was at like 2 years ago. Again, the API has actually changed, so and I'm sure Ryan has also changed a bit in his mindset. And or three, you just don't understand it or don't care to understand it because you're like, hey, I'm plugging along and this is working great. Why introduce more complexity to my application when I don't need change? Like I'm good. Things are running well for me. So I think all those are pretty legitimate. I don't think RSC has been showed very well yet by many people to actually convince people why it's valuable. And I think that Redwood, your team is working on that. I think we're working on it. Even Kent is like, I know, been tweeting about it a lot and has a talk and workshop and stuff coming up. And I think there's a lot of people who are bought in and saying RSC, it is a good tech. It's been a very bad communication problem so far. And so we do want to show people how it can be done. It's also so low level, so you can build on it in different ways. The way Redwood is building on it is going to be a little bit different than how Remix is building, which is different than how Next is built. And that's cool, but it's also hard because it means you're going to see some growing pains of that. We kind of dealt with that with Hooks, I think. When Hooks came out, it was a little more fleshed out, but we had to learn what the best pattern was through community trial and error a little bit. So the way Remix is going to try and solve this problem, I'm a big fan of. I'm pretty biased, obviously, but I think it's going to be pretty cool. So we've had an RFC out for like way too long. Unfortunately, it's been a while. There's a lot of reasons we haven't gotten to it, but Jacob Eby wrote this RFC for us, and the idea is I don't remember how he came to this, but basically, the way I remember it is basically in a meeting he was just like, what if we just can send RSC down in a loader? Just make it do the opposite of maybe what we've seen so far, where everything is RSC first, and rather just say like you can just opt in when you want RSC to be some data, because that at the end of the day, that's all RSC is. It's just data. It's just component. That's a component as data, or data as a component, something like that. And that's a little bit easier to think about versus like, oh, now I've got like, this is like React, 2.0 or something, like this is new React. So that to me, like that was a big mind shift for me, even just understanding that. And that's what I'm excited about for like all of our users and even potential users of Remix and even React Router potentially, is the idea of, oh, I can actually use RSC, but I can make it opt in. I can use it where I want to, and I can just load it as data. It will actually come from my server because it is generated on the server and created on the server, and it'll come down. So that's like our first step of where we're going. So single fetch, we've talked about that a lot. That's like a big reason we've made single fetch, is because you need a new like data format essentially to send down the RSCs. And that is, so that's what single fetch will enable with TurboStream, and eventually I think it'll be replaced. And I don't know all the inner details of that, but that's the idea. So I think we're pretty imminent to like having a version of that. And then there is this like totally like way out future of what Michael and Ryan have been kind of working on a lot with the full team, of really trying to think about a version of Remix built more heavily on RSC, and what benefits does that give you? That's I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about that, so I'll probably stop there. But they're definitely thinking like way more beyond that. But yeah, I'm just excited about it coming down from loaders. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I like that as a first step, because it doesn't seem like the framework is completely changing and bending to RSCs, which I kind of got that vibe from Next.js a little bit, where it was like, dang, this doesn't even feel like Next.js anymore. It's got all these weird things. So if it's just
a whole separate API.
Yeah. I mean, hot take, I really think they should have called it, they should have come up with a different framework. I don't think it should have been called Next. I'm not on the team, so I don't get that decision. And it's also totally in hindsight. Like, I get that they want that smooth migration strategy. In hindsight, I don't think it was as smooth. I think it would have been way better to just be like, hey, this is,
fast forward JS.
Yeah, this is something else. Yeah, exactly. This is fast forward by Vercel. This is a really cool, new framework we got.
Yeah, that is a good hot take. I like that one.
Any other questions on RSC and Remix's future?
Brad, do you have anything?
I'm good. We're
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will kick off the next segment of the show, where we do pick some plugs. So it's generally something that we pick something that we like and we plug something that we've been working on. So do you guys, whoever wants to go first?
Brooks, go for it. Got anything?
I'm trying to think.
Need time?
Okay.
I was like, I have one if you need time.
I think I've got it. My pick is going to be kind of silly, or just because I'm very behind on this. I, for the longest time, had like AirPods, and I couldn't speak through them. They got messed up because I dropped them in water, so I couldn't like use them as a microphone. And like they would always, one would connect and the other one wouldn't connect. And so I finally I got a little bit of a tax return this year, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna go buy like AirPod Pros, see if they're actually that good. I just like held out. They're a little expensive, whatever. And then I got them, and I was like, these are actually amazing. Like, I love these so much. Yeah, the noise canceling is like exactly what I want. I literally, like, the first day I had them, I was on a flight and I had to edit a video. That's always like the worst thing to do on a flight. But it was amazing because actually I could hear myself. It was so cool. So I'm very pro AirPod Pros. Apple is so hit or miss on their products. I feel like it's like M1 chips or, silicon it's super cool, but then they make like a new version of the iPhone that's not even different at all than the other one and costs $400 extra more. But the AirPod Pros, very, very pro AirPod Pro.
Have you guys tried the Max?
I have not.
So I've got the Sony ones here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what I like about them is they're very light. And I think they've got fantastic noise cancellation. And they fit my head well. The Maxes feel huge and heavy and big, although I think the sound quality was like a little bit better, obviously, because you have like giant rocks on your ears, you know? And maybe the noise cancellation was a little bit better, again, just because they're gigantic. But at the end of the day, these are just way more comfortable for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not a big over-ear person in general,
I'm
so
not
I haven't
either.
tried them.
Well, and this is so vain. I don't want them to mess up my hair. So I usually just go with the AirPods. But I do like, I don't know. I do like the fact that it has a longer battery life. I've never tried them. So like if I am on a long flight, I do want as much as I can. Because as soon as they die on a long flight, I'm like, no.
Yeah, I'll say this, like these on a flight are amazing. You don't hear any of the cabin noise, whereas the AirPod Pros, it still kind of leaks in. So these are just something that put me in another world, and like I always like that when I sit down and focus.
Yeah, that's valid.
And you can also judge me for saying this. I will say the one nice thing about the over ear thing is you put that on and people know you have them on. Leave me alone. Sometimes with the AirPods, it's like hidden, under my hair, and people don't know, and they'll come out and I'm like, what?
Yeah,
Can't hear you.
That's a good point. You can turn on like the conversation mode, but I feel like it's like it's really interruptive. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah,
it's a cool
these
idea.
have like a version of that where you like hold your hand over it, but you've already missed like the first 10 seconds of the conversation. It's gone.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep. Do you have a plug?
Oh yeah, plug. I just I don't know, Remix. I'm
not, go check it out.
Yeah, actually no. My plug is actually React Router. I think it's still such a cool project. And so if you haven't looked at React Router since V6, especially 6.4, I would check it out because I don't know. It's really cool. You're getting most of what you get from Remix already. But in this library that has been used by millions and millions and millions of people and just used all over the world. I'm very pro boring tech, as much as I think Remix is cool and has some cool tricks. Again, we're cutting the cleverness out in some ways, and I think that's cool. Boring old tech that just works is awesome. And I know React Router has had again that V3 to V4 checkered pass or whatever, but that was years and years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, and React Router has existed for 10 years at this point. It's almost as old as React itself is. And yeah, I'm just pro boring old tech. And so React Router is kind of in that category now. So if you haven't played with it in a while, I would check it out because it is a good way to make sure that you build a sustainable website.
It's surprising how many founders we've had on the show that are boring tech. Pick something that that you can build in. Don't do things that are cutting edge that you're going to hit bugs. Do something nice and stable that you can just crank on. Make what you build the focus and not the tech the focus.
Yeah.
Brad, you have a pick and plug?
Let's see. I've got a pick. We got a new puppy.
Yes, you did. Recently. The cutest puppy.
So I'll link the blog post I put up. Did that come through? Let me see.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it come through on any of the streams. Anyways, we got a new
my stuff. Yeah.
We got a new puppy.
In the show notes.
It's a petite golden doodle, it's called. So she's only going to grow to be about 25 pounds. A mini version of a golden doodle. And we got her at 8 weeks old. And oh my God, having a puppy is the ultimate high and the ultimate low. It's stop biting everything. Oh my God, you're so cute. All in the same 10 seconds. It's a wild ride, but it's been really cool to see her get adjusted to the house and the kids and the family. And she already knows a ton of tricks and commands. And so we're just trying to make the best dog we can make.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cute.
And then you have a plug?
Plug. I've been putting out YouTube videos lately. It's mostly Remix stuff. I'm also going to put out a lot of the shorts that I had released to Twitter a while back. And so I'm on this grind to get monetized on YouTube again.
Nice.
Start making content. So yeah, youtube.com/Brad Garrepy is where you'll find it all. you want to learn about Remix or just a glimpse into what I'm thinking about or doing, go check me out there.
Awesome. Yeah, your one about the interview and like a plain text document got a lot of comments.
Oh yeah.
Spike.
Yep. And it's so funny because and I haven't said what company that was, and I don't want to put anybody on blast, but that company has an interactive TypeScript editor playground that they post and produce.
Whoa.
So it's like, why would you have me interview in some ridiculous plain text document? Like I got so upset. I was just like, okay, I think I'm just going to leave this interview. Like it's not for me.
Just exit, leave room.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Wild. It was wild stuff.
So, okay, I'm going to pick a podcast that I've been listening to. It's called Deep Questions with Cal Newport. So I've read some of Cal Newport's stuff. He wrote Deep Work several years ago. About a month ago, he released a new.
That one is Deep Work, the yellow one.
Oh yeah. And then he just released a new book called Slow Productivity, and he's been talking about it a lot on his podcast. And it's really interesting. It's this idea of like, what are the things that you can be doing over time? Not just like hustling on stuff, but like really building up. But he also has a lot of interesting theories that I could easily buy into in terms of why we are where we are with tech and the things that we do. So, for example, one of the things he was talking about was when personal computers became a thing, we got rid of a lot of admins and secretaries that would send out memos and things like that. And so now we've all accumulated that overhead, and it's changed how we have conversations and talk to people and how we do work. So it's kind of interesting just to hear the history behind stuff, but also, okay, how does this apply to the work that I do? One of the things that he said earlier, one of the episodes I was listening to today was, like, I love to like hear how people have their productivity systems set up and, trying to tweak and tune my Notion stuff. But he's like, at the end of the day, like your tool is not going to do the work for you. You can read all these articles, but you still got to do the work. And so the whole purpose of the tool is more about the organization and the planning. And so just making the point that at the end of the day, like sometimes the number of emails you get is more of a symptom of you've like taken on too many projects. It's not necessarily the fact that you can't respond to hundreds of emails. It's the fact that you've said yes to 20 projects. So you can fix the problem by being more intentional about the projects that you say yes to, which will then trickle down to less email. So I just really like that approach. And it's a little bit contrarian in some ways because it's saying like you're not talking about the thing that you really should be talking about. So check out his podcast. It's called Deep Questions with Cal Newport. And then I'm going to plug, I'll jump on the YouTube train as well. So my channel is Self Teach Me. I'm kind of halfway in the middle of a Redwood series right now that I'll pick back up. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm working on building out a project 6 different ways, and you'll see a lot of that content come through on YouTube. So check that out.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sweet. And okay, so I'll go ahead and do the ending. And then, as I said, today's opposite day. So I'll do the beginning. But if you are listening on your podcatcher of choice, please leave a rating and review because that helps us reach out and find other guests, find other listeners, and continue to do what we're doing. And again, special thanks to our sponsor, Postman. And then if you're late joining us, what happened was we just jumped into conversation and got excited about it. So maintaining the flow, we never did a proper intro. So today's going to be opposite day. I'm going to do the intro at the beginning. So it was a little strange. All good. And I think, this is going to be fun. I'm going to have to pause to talk amongst yourselves. The guy that's supposed to spray our yard is here. Give me just a second.
Yeah, you're good. No worries.
Nice. Have you done any other podcasts recently?
No, I did. There's like this one guy in the Remix community who's got like a really small one he runs that I did a little while ago. I don't even remember the name. I feel bad. I'd have to look it up. But no, yeah, I haven't been. I'm pretty like unknown for this role, which is very funny. I'm in like this really middle place, which is okay. Like I don't need to be super known. necessarily, but I do want people to know about Remix. So it's like, it's just a weird relationship.
I mean, you also still have like Ryan posting like
Oh,
sick video
Ryan's
series
a
on
way
YouTube,
better
so
DevRel
it's
than I
like,
am. Yeah.
dude, yeah, those video series teach me things about the web, not just things about Remix. They're so good.
Yeah, they are super solid. They're just like really evergreen, and yeah, I like them a lot. He's just, and I mean, Ryan is such a good teacher. Like that's what they did for years. They were React training. So yeah, it's been interesting because I think most people think DevRel or dev advocate, or whatever these roles are, and it's like, oh, you make education videos and stuff, and it's like, that might be what you do, but like, yeah, for me, it's like I like making videos. I am like, Ryan is way better at it, honestly. Like his videos are just going to do better than mine, and that's okay. I'm learning from him, and I'm learning and growing. But like that's not a lot of what I do. A lot of what I do is like kind of behind the scenes, and it's like a mix of a bunch of different roles, and it's a lot of just like making sure that when Ryan does create a video, that it actually like gets out there and gets posted about and is followed up on and all these kind of things. So yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Check out the YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web design and development with a little bit of zest. Today we have Brooks on the show, and we will be talking about all things Remix and what the future of React looks like. And I did not cue up the music, but I can just, I'll overlay that in anyways. We won't play it now. Okay. This is going to be fun for people that are listening live. You get all the behind the scenes stuff. Hello, my name is Amy Dutton. I am a lead maintainer on the Redwood JS core team.
Hey, y'all. My name is Brad Garapi. I'm a front-end developer at Atlassian working on Confluence.
And as I mentioned earlier, we have Brooks. Brooks, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Brooks. I'm the Remix Dev Relations Manager at Shopify.
Awesome. It's going to be a great show. It was a great show. It's going to be a great show. And today we are sponsored by Postman. So they have a conference coming up at the end of the month. That's April 29th through May 2nd. James and I will be there live. We're excited to be there and excited to have Postman as a sponsor. So it's a fantastic tool for working with APIs. So specifically, if you're working with Remix, you can use Postman to gather data, check that out, shoot that through your loader within your Remix project. So check out Postman and join us at the conference. There we go.
Sweet.
That's the intro. Sweet. Well, thanks everybody for joining us live. Sorry about the weird ending, but try and keep it fun, keep it real. And thanks, Brooks, for joining us. I love the conversation and just want to talk more with people that have similar but different problems than we do.
Oh my gosh,
Here's
the dog.
Is it a girl or a boy?
It's a girl.
What's her name?
So cute.
We call her Charlie.
Oh, sweet.
Precious.
Is she tired?
Adorable.
She's wiped out, Gabby says. They ran errands today.
Oh, fun.
Nice. Doll.
I
don't run errands with my dogs. They're too big.
Yeah, you've Great Danes, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, 1.5 Great Danes. Yeah.
What is 1.5?
One's a half German Shepherd.
Okay.
Oh goodness. We have I'm not gonna make her. That's gonna be weird. We have a greyhound. It's a greyhound. I'm not gonna lift her up. I was like, do I move the camera? No, we're not gonna mess with it. So she's a former racer and she was a winner. So that's fun.
So cool.
Yeah, but she's getting a little old. She broke her leg, which kind of ended her career. But we have found YouTube videos of her racing, which is really fun.
That's so
not
cool.
that I
is she still like pretty
support
fast?
those things. She's 9. So
She's 9.
and when we lived in Chicago, we had it was a small yard, but it was fenced in, and she basically ran a track in our yard. Here we don't have it fenced in, so we walk her. So it's not like you can like you can try and run with her, but she will beat you because they get up to like 35 miles an hour, I think.
Yeah, they're crazy.
Yeah.
Do you take her on any runs when you go?
I don't. My daughter walked her the other week and tried to run. And I was like, no, you can't do that. Like, because she fell trying to run with her. Yeah. So,
crazy.
and then Peanuts, our other dog.
Oh.
He just took off. So,
See ya.
anyways, yeah. Fun times. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll catch you next week.
See you, stream.